Welcome and thanks, Tom, for making yourself available today for this discussion. With no further ado, I think thinking obviously of Microsoft as a global, people will think of the global presence, the data centers, the data regions, the express routes, etc. So getting straight into the question of the space community, maybe before getting into specific verticals or topic, could you elaborate or give your first vision on the development of partnership in the space community for Microsoft?
And first of all, thank you very much for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our guests. And as Microsoft looks at space, we are incredibly excited about the space ecosystem. And our goal as a company, as we have always done for the last 40 years of our history, is to help and grow and help that community thrive. And as we look at the work that we're doing across the community, you've seen some public announcements from us. We've announced partnerships with companies like SpaceX and their Starlink LEO constellation. We've announced partnerships with SES. And Microsoft is not looking to compete with the industry. In fact, we're looking to enable it. And we believe that by combining the technology that our existing players like SpaceX and SES have, together with the technology that we have as a cloud provider, that you can do some pretty amazing things. Let me give an example of this, perhaps to make it real for people. As we look at Thales Alinea's deeper vision, this is a great example of taking technology from the space industry and combining it together with cloud technology. Deeper vision takes Earth observation images and it finds points of relevance in them. And when you bring that analytic capability to the ground station, you can do things at an order of magnitude faster than was possible before. And you can eliminate some of the constraints that have historically existed and open up new scenarios and new ranges of scenarios. And so from a strategic perspective, we've announced a lot of partnerships at Microsoft, and we're going to announce a whole lot more. And in space, we believe that how we partner and who we partner with is a materially differentiator for us, especially as we work with companies all around the world in different industries. And our approach is always going to be one of multi-orbit, multi-band, and multi-vendor.
Yeah, thanks for this introduction. As you point out, one thing that space is diverse in terms of applications and obviously means and verticals. So maybe touching, and you mentioned it already, on remote sensing and data collection. So if we look at it, the reality is, or my perception is, really we are at a turning point in the field of remote sensing, weather monitoring, or IoT. I mean, just this year, I think we have had already 190 new satellites launched into orbit, and a total reaching maybe 800, but made of plenty of sensors, different data, things that are more or less homogeneous, capturing a lot of data from Earth and enabling change detection, but still how to leverage all of that, what can be the impact of computational power, data distribution. So can you try to give a sense, you started with that, but what Microsoft can bring or accelerate, or we can accelerate value creation?
Well, there's no question that data drives the world. And there is also no question that the volume of data, that the volume of signals is only increasing. I was looking just this week at Microsoft, and we're now seeing over 6 trillion signals coming into our cloud every day. And that number is only growing. So it is just staggering. As we look at remote sensing in particular, this is an enormous driver of data. And what cloud brings to space and to remote sensing is hyperscale power. And what this means is that we can increase the efficiency for applying artificial intelligence on remote sensing data, such as Earth observation data from satellites. And we can then use the processing power that we have distributed around the planet to find ways to analyze data that we couldn't use before. If you think about an Earth observation data that you may take from overhead, it may be megabytes, terabytes in size. It may be made up of different densities of images and different resolutions. And the ultimate goal is to both derive intelligence from this image and then disseminate this intelligence quickly. And the work that we're doing with our augmented intelligence technology allows us to dissect that image at the edge, to then make informed decisions with that sensor, and then use our global compute platform to disseminate that data efficiently around the planet, and then optimize real-time decision making. So our goal by bringing compute to the edge, by using our augmented intelligence to understand that imagery, is to be able to accelerate that time to decision and make the most of that data. And there's just a range of possibilities that every day we continue to see new scenarios opened up and new scenarios be possible.
And so, as you mentioned, in that case, and change detection is a big part. So the fact to get to compress time, but also having the right partners that could be vertical expert or all the data suppliers and make all of that work together is where you are to play a role as well in combining the various capabilities, let's say, as well. All right, that's interestingly, and data and Earth observation is one interesting part. And thinking of agriculture, and we worked on that a while ago, one question is about connectivity and cloud in addition to the data. And you talked about dissemination. How a farmer in the middle of somewhere will have the information that actually you get from analytics can be an interesting question, I think. But beyond that, you mentioned it, and I think, well, Euroconsult would be one of those trillion signals you receive on a daily basis, maybe. But cloud is at the heart of almost every, well, many social and almost every business activity those days for obvious reasons, and likely the pandemic has just accelerated the trend. Which still a lot of differences in the connectivity itself, so then in the ability to sync, to leverage cloud capabilities, etc. So I think for a part, it's where satellite networks are playing the role of complement in the connectivity networks and other parts. Admittedly, in the past, obviously, there has been customers of satellite connectivity. There has been a lot of customers, obviously, of cloud in the recent years. So can you share about how bringing together as a new partnership shall create new value, let's say, for the users of one or the other, or completely new clients, let's say?
Yeah, Pacome, our goal is to connect the unconnected and to bring the best of Azure, our cloud computing platform, to any location on the planet. As we talked about in the introduction, Microsoft has an extensive physical infrastructure that covers the planet. We have hyperscale data centers today in over 20 countries, and we've made an enormous set of announcements where we grow that infrastructure into Africa, the Middle East, Europe, Asia Pacific. Microsoft also has over 165,000 miles of fiber under the ocean, under the earth. And this gives us an incredibly rich connective network that is software defined. As we look at space, this asset complements the space-based ecosystem. We have an opportunity where we can co-locate ground stations together with our hyperscale infrastructure. If I look at Quincy and Washington here in the United States, where I'm sitting, we've co-located Earth observation terminals, taking data from space with our hyperscale data centers. And in this case, traffic can enter the Microsoft network and never enter the public internet, which gives incredible speeds and ways to operate that we talked about before when we were talking about remote sensing. As we look at what our partners, SpaceX, are doing, I think launching 60 new Starlink satellites every few weeks, We look at what SES is doing with O3b mPower, which is bringing gigabyte scale performance. That allows us to begin to connect the unconnected and to bring the best of Azure to any location on the planet. What we're also thinking about with these connectivity scenarios is how we enable the next generation of space developers. And we've been creating a set of tools to enable people to build space-based applications and then natively take advantage of our ecosystem. Azure Orbital Emulator is an example of a digital tool for space developers that we've announced. And we have a lot more work that we're doing with a focus on taking advantage of space for connectivity and then using cloud components all the way from the edge to the hyperscale data center.
And that's what about the additional questions I may have about the ecosystem. So obviously, depending on what used to be the situation, like being a customer of the network operator or the cloud provider, or certain of those app developers or new capability developers that you mentioned. So I think if we think of the, this opening decade for a large part, you think that those new capability will to a certain extent result in a transformation of the ecosystem at large, of where what is a touch point for a user, where will be a client or subscribe to maybe an end-to-end service or some capabilities, as opposed to what it was maybe a few years back.
I think without a doubt, we're already observing that what was previously the domain of governments or very large corporations, space connectivity is becoming democratized. If I look already, whilst it's still early, at how Starlink is changing connectivity in the United States. And in fact, what we're observing is a fascinating pattern where sometimes space connectivity can be faster and better than land-based connectivity. The distance from the ground to LEO and back down again can in fact be faster than a fiber route that was perhaps created two or three decades ago on public domain land or mapped to legacy systems like railroad lines. Space connectivity can fundamentally transform. And at Microsoft, we're not just thinking about corporations and how they can make use of it. We're thinking about, for example, our consumers using an Xbox device, our Office 365 customers that are using our cloud to collaborate. The scenarios span all the way from an end consumer through to enterprises that are taking advantage of this new technology and how it's becoming available.
Yes, it's typically what we see when we consider that a merchant ship is becoming actually like a home office, where you need to have the same capability everywhere for any worker of the organization, I suspect. And that's been pretty powerful in the last year, especially with massive teleworking as we experienced it, for sure. I was thinking on that question as well, on network topology and having a global presence. So from connectivity, I know the topic is certainly about all the issues of sovereignty, data ownership, data security, cyber security. You mentioned about not touching, the public internet network, for example. So I think it goes in two directions. One is where you may need to locate even satellite ground stations next to data centers, in which country, which regulation. It's all a matter of technology and regulation working together in many places. But as well, how to manage and guarantee the kind of security that users expect in the coming years for their information, essentially. So I think it's also directions in which you are working with Azure.
Absolutely. Trust in cloud technology and in technology in general could not be more important. And Microsoft is showing our commitment to trust in a whole variety of ways. Let me start, first of all, with where we're spending our money, the investments that we're making. And a huge part of why we are building cloud computing infrastructure around the world is based on our belief in cyber sovereignty. We believe that an individual's data, that an organization's data should be able to be stored in the country in which they choose, that it should be able to be processed in the country in which they choose, and that their privacy should be preserved. The investments that we've made to put our cloud today into 21 countries, and the investments that we're making that take it over to 30 as we build infrastructure in everywhere from Mexico through to new countries in Europe like Belgium and Sweden and Denmark and Spain and Italy, across Asia into Malaysia and expanding further in Singapore, Indonesia. These investments are first and foremost about trust and about cyber sovereignty. So we are deeply committed to that, and we continue to be committed to that. The second way that we're committed is through the work that we do through compliance regimes and trust. Today, Azure and Microsoft's cloud supports over 100 different regimes at a country level, as well as at a industry level. For example, if you're a Swiss investment bank running on our cloud, we've worked closely with the banking authorities in Switzerland. If you're the country of Australia, we've worked closely with the Australian government. We've done this across the world and across every industry. And every week we continue to make new announcements around the work that we're doing here.
Sorry, please.
I was just going to say the final thing is, of course, trust is a posture that you yourself form. And the way in which Microsoft is committing to allow you to build a trust posture with cloud is through transparency and through the information that we share, the telemetry that we provide, the insights that we provide. That is a commitment from Microsoft that you'll see us continuing to be transparent. We recently announced a European data boundary as an example of that, and you'll see more announcements from us.
Thank you. And I assume that in places, it kind of also employ working with certain of the satellite companies or network operators to even reinforce the kind of cyber security or security of those networks themselves or those systems in the future, let's say. As it's an open question for the space industry and community as for any industry at the moment.
It absolutely is. And I think the last 12 months in particular, and even the last 6 months, has shown the criticality of cybersecurity and the emerging nature of the threat, the evolving nature of the threat. And as a company, Microsoft has made a lot of investments into security, and we are committed to working with our partners to also help them. This is not just Microsoft that can alone be successful. We have to help the entire community and the entire space ecosystem.
And maybe I think time goes quite fast. So for the few minutes left we have, I think we've talked obviously about two large, let's say, space user segments. But if I also turn our eyes to the sky, and this week was just about space tourism, maybe. But if we open the topic to all the new fields, let's say, of space activities at the moment, a lot of initiatives around space logistics, potentially then to going to the moon or having networks, data exchanges with Earth or to Mars, whatever. Do you see as well a role in those fields? So it's like obviously developing as we speak and promoted not just by government, but working with the private sector. So where as well clouds and computational power and those approaches can apply in this particular environment or vision.
Well, it's definitely exciting times. We've seen announcements this week. We saw announcements last week, and I'm sure there's more to come. And I think looking back at 2020, there was almost $9 billion of investment into private space companies. So the future looks very bright and very bold. And obviously, a big topic is human presence and human activity in space. Virgin, of course, did some great work. NASA has humans on board the International Space Station, and many people are looking to the moon and Mars in sustainable ways. I guess for Microsoft, we're committed to furthering the advancement of science, of exploration, of economic, cooperation with public sector, and of course, supporting sustainable life here on Earth. So where humans go, they're going to need compute and processing, and Microsoft wants to be there to support them.
For sure. I'm sure there will be plenty of work of even simulating to make sure that we have sustainable presence for sure before we even send people to the moon and so forth. Okay, I think we're getting pretty close to the end of what we had. So if you look on your side and from what you said in your and the different partnerships and everything you've made, if you can think of one or two important milestones for you looking at the coming months or the next year, if you would like to highlight maybe one or two objectives or things that you want to achieve in space, maybe that could be your final word or comments.
Well, I'll leave you with perhaps two milestones. Obviously, the first is Microsoft has made a number of partnership announcements over the last several months, beginning late last year. This year, you're going to see more partnership announcements and with more companies from around the planet. So we started in the United States. We're increasingly going global. So you'll see us talk a lot more at coming space events. And we've got a number of great events on the calendar, in fact, starting in August. I think the second thing that you'll see from Microsoft is us continuing to grow and expand our ground footprint. We started in Quincy in Washington, as I mentioned, and now we're expanding around the planet. We've got plans for Asia, for the South Pacific, for Europe. And this year, I expect us to make more announcements around our ground footprint as well. So there's two teasers. There's more to come, but it's going to be a busy year ahead.
I look forward to it.